Hello, and welcome to the Trauma Uncomplicated podcast, where we untangle the ways complex trauma formed you and your relationships and give you the tools to get your grounded, true self back in the driver's seat. My name is Christine Morgan, and I am a relational trauma therapist. Okay, so this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And the reason for this is because until we understand the way complex trauma has formed us and the way we engage in relationships, we are not going to be able to get our shame out of the driver's seat. And I don't know about you, but for me and in my own healing journey, I have found that not knowing that it was trauma impacting me just created all this empty space for shame to swoop in and really make me feel like I was just totally unlovable and too broken. I remember there was even a point in my life where before I was married and I was, just feeling like maybe I'm just not meant to ever be in a relationship. Maybe I am just too broken and I need to, be single throughout my life and adopt kids because I had this really deep desire in me to be a mom, but I had so little confidence in myself to be able to show up in a relationship. And it wasn't until somebody was able to put the word trauma to my story and help me understand that it wasn't me in the driver's seat this whole time. It was my survival instincts that were taking over. It wasn't until they were able to name that for me that I was able to actually do something about it and find that beneath all of the baggage of my trauma was somebody who had so much to give to a relationship. So I have people ask me all the time, Christy, you talk about complex trauma, but what even is complex trauma? So today we're going to dive into what it is, what makes it different from PTSD, and why is it so complex? So if you grew up with childhood trauma and have received a collection of diagnoses over the years from mental health professionals, such as, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, borderline personality disorder, PTSD, ADHD, the list goes on and on. I mean, gosh, that can be so disorienting. I mean, where do we even start? Right? It's so easy to get discouraged and feel like you are incurable, that you're just too broken. Okay, if this is you, just take a deep breath with me for a second. Okay? Understanding what I'm about to share with you is going to be a game changer. And what do I mean by game changer? What I mean is that we're literally going to change the way that you heal. Once we're able to understand what's at the root, that maybe trauma in a more complex form, one that's more discrete and not something you would have immediately pinned as the root problem. When we're able to find that root, we stop playing this game of whack-a-mole with our symptoms, just tackling the next issue that comes up when our trauma is coming out sideways. And instead of trying to go symptom by symptom, we're able to heal on that deeper level so that there's something more lasting and something more durable there in our healing. So my goal for you is for you to be able to maybe put some language today to what is it that is causing you to experience all of this distress in your relationships, in your life, in your nervous system, in your body, for you to be able to put some language there so that you have direction for how to actually heal it. So let's chat about complex trauma for a bit. Complex trauma is defined as the exposure to multiple interrelated recurrent forms of traumatic experiences and, this is the big part, the difficulties that arise from trying to adapt to or survive these experiences. So these experiences often begin in early childhood, but not always, and they recur over a long period of time. And here's the big piece. Okay, the trauma is inflicted by others, and usually by the people who were supposed to be trustworthy. It is relational in nature, and it distorts the lens through which we see all other relationships. So examples of events that can lead to CPTSD are childhood abuse, neglect or abandonment, ongoing domestic violence or abuse, repeatedly witnessing violence or abuse, being forced or manipulated into prostitution, torture, kidnapping or slavery, being a prisoner of war, being culturally dislocated, discrimination, and civil unrest or war trauma. Okay, so there's so many ways that we can experience CPTSD. But what makes it different from PTSD? This is the question I get all the time. So unlike PTSD that is due to a single event, CPTSD, complex trauma, is the result of living in and trying to survive a traumatic environment. It is the water that you swim in. So both CPTSD and PTSD involve those symptoms that we think about when we think about trauma, such as re-experiencing symptoms like flashbacks, hypervigilance, efforts to avoid distressing reminders of the trauma. But people with complex trauma typically have additional symptoms that can be easily confused with who we are. This is where shame comes in, okay? You have difficulty being able to distinguish, is this me or is this my trauma? So some of these symptoms include emotional regulation. So you get super reactive in your relationships, or you feel like you go from 0 to 60 without warning, and you just wonder, like, why can't I just be, more even emotionally? Why do I have to be so reactive? Or complex trauma can distort your sense of identity. So you struggle with shame or guilt, or just generally not liking who you are. And most of all, one of the symptoms is just having problems in your relationships. And it doesn't mean that you are incapable of having a healthy relationship, okay? It just means that trauma is driving the bus. It has formed you and your ability to be able to survive threatening experiences. But now you have to learn a new way. You have to learn how to live within a world where maybe you aren't currently amidst a bunch of threats. So the diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, does not capture the developmental effects of complex trauma exposure. Like I said earlier, complex trauma involves going through life ill-equipped to regulate, experience, and maintain healthy relationships, and even just have a clear sense of who you are. It stunts your growth in areas that help us navigate life well, and it leads to just a slew of complications. Okay, so you might have attachment issues, like having difficulty with boundaries, or trust issues, or relationship issues, physical issues like chronic pain or illness, sensory motor development issues, asthma, skin problems, autoimmune disorders. And then you might also have regulation issues, like not being able to label and express your emotions or communicate what you need, and regulating your emotions. Behavior issues like impulsivity, self-harm, aggression, sleep issues, eating disorders, substance use issues, cognitive issues like difficulty with attention and executive functioning, hello, ADHD, problems with processing information, difficulty completing tasks, difficulty planning and anticipating problems. You might have identity issues like a poor sense of self, low self-esteem, shame, guilt, body image issues. Gosh, even just listing all of those, I notice in myself just this this overwhelm that comes over you of, wow, complex trauma literally impacts every single area of our lives. It disrupts us at our core, and distorts the lens through which we experience the world. So this is why it's so different from PTSD. It's not about a single traumatic event. It's about the environment itself being traumatic. Every part of you, cognitive, emotional, behavioral, physical, every single part of you has been altered and it has adapted to this traumatic environment. Complex trauma is about going through life ill-equipped. You were not given the tools to develop in a way that would support you and your relationships in a healthy environment. You learned and adapted in ways that helped you survive a threatening environment. So here comes shame, right? You haven't been given the chance to grow in ways that would support your ability to thrive in life, and you carry a pile of diagnoses with you, and it's so easy to feel like you're just inherently defective. It's so easy to think, well, this is just who I am. And can we please just honor for a second that here you are. Your mind, body, and heart have been adapting and adapting and adapting over and over to the difficulties and barriers the best way they have known how. How incredible. It isn't perfect, but you've made it far enough to finally land here and gain a little bit more perspective on what your healing path can look like. That the next step is going to involve finally equipping yourself, learning how to live within a safe environment. Unlike PTSD, the complex trauma framework recognizes that your symptoms need to be understood in the context of your incredible efforts to adapt and survive. So this is why complex trauma is called complex. It's called complex because the trauma exposure and trauma adaptations are inextricably intertwined. It is a dual problem of both the exposure to harmful experiences and the adaptation to these life experiences that have created short and long-term issues in your life. Okay, let's take a moment and let me say that again, okay? It's a dual problem of both exposure to harmful experiences, the trauma, and the adaptation to these life experiences that have created the issues that you see in your life today. So a complex trauma framework acknowledges that behaviors like relationship issues, reactivities, self-hatred, eating disorders, addictions are adaptive strategies to survive overwhelming experiences and prepare for ongoing threat in a hostile world. So once you're able to piece apart, okay, is this complex trauma or is this me? You're able to go from this thought pattern of what's wrong with you to what happened to you. See, the thing is, you have been adapting your whole life and will continue to do so. You are adapting, growing, learning. You are resilient. Your whole lens, approach to relationships, biology, behaviors have been altered to the traumatic environment. It is not your fault. It is so easy to assume that your adaptations are who you are, when really they're how you survived. This is the time to finally unlearn those survival skills and find the you beneath it all. The key now is to adapt once again, but this time to a safe environment. To finally adjust to safety so that you can show up in your life and relationships in a way that leaves you equipped to navigate life. The path forward is going to involve unlearning the old patterns and finally filling your toolbox. So this is where I leave you today. I want you to take a moment and consider, what are the things you feel so much shame for about yourself? Now, connect that with how have these behaviors come from the ways you learn to survive? Is this really you? Or is this your trauma? And I challenge you to try to see yourself more clearly today. Who is the you beneath all the trauma? Okay? We are not our survival skills, but we need to learn to adapt to a new environment now. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today. I love being able to walk this path with you. And we are going to continue doing this work, diving deep into how has your trauma formed you, so that you can peel back the layers and see, okay, is this me or is this my trauma? And if it is your trauma, what do we do about it?